Welcome to Mason and Hamlin. I am Bruce Clark, lead design engineer, and I will show you around the factory today. Mason and Hamlin pianos are widely regarded as among the world's finest. The pianos have a wonderful lush voice and an excellence of construction that make them very desirable. Most of our pianos go to professional musicians to whom a fine instrument is a capital investment rather than a consumer item. Mason and Hamlin was founded in Boston in 1854 by Henry Mason and Emmons Hamlin. In 1932, during the Great Depression, Mason and Hamlin, Chickering, and Knabe, three of the best in American piano history, consolidated manufacturing into the Aeolian American plant in East Rochester, New York. In 1989, the Falcone Company moved Mason and Hamlin into our current location at 35 Duncan Street in Haverhill. The plant has approximately 90,000 square feet of manufacturing space spread over 6 floors plus a basement. Building a piano starts with the rim. Pressing a rim is much like laying the keel in a sailboat. Thus, we begin our tour in the rim room. This is the pressing room or the rim room. And here basically we press things to shapes. The rim presses are all curved presses that make the shape that you know as a grand piano. Now, a rim is made up by many small, thin layers that are bent around to form with glue. And once the glue sets, that's how you hold the shape. And again, the rims are all made out of maple, which is absolutely superb material for making rims. This is an inner rim press for a concert grand piano. This is for a 9'4" piano, which incidentally we designed and brought into being here. And so you can see it's got the shape of the piano there. What you do is you put glue on the laminations, you bend them around the form, clamp them. When the glue is dry, you have a rim. This is a stack of laminations for a rim we're getting ready to press. Okay, so you can see there's 2 layers of plastic laminate and then the layers of maple, the maple wood, which will go into making the rim. Now what they're going to do is they're going to run it through the glue spreader. They're going to apply glue to both sides of everything except the 2 outside layers. And then they're going to bend it around one of the rim presses and clamp it into place. And so as you can see now with the rollers, it will just pull the layers right through. You notice there's a brass caul sheet there that distributes the pressure from the cauls on the thinner outer rim, but you see now there's glue on both sides. They will then run the individual maple layers through. And again, this is a process that goes back as long as people have been making bent rims. Once the glue's on it, they have to move.
Yeah.
We have about 20 minutes to get it under clamp pressure. Typically we do it in under 10. Each one of those clamp screws is capable of about 48,000 pounds. But you need to have 150 pounds per square inch on any of these glues, otherwise you have a weak glue joint. You need that kind of pressure.
Right. Where do we go now? We go in the next level?
Next floor up. Here we've assembled what we would call a skeleton. This, you might say, is the inner structure of a grand piano. It's been CNC machined also, and so it's all fit together now. And so as you see, this is a very sturdy structure. This is a maple rim. This is as sturdy gets, right? This is poplar posts. This piece right here is a belly rail.
Okay.
And so this big structural piece here.
Okay.
And it's upside down at the moment.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
And so the soundboard is mounted on the other side. The strings would be farther this way. But here now we've assembled everything and we're basically ready to rock and roll. So this is the rough mill where we take wood when it comes in. We basically get it put together into pieces that are the appropriate size for whatever we're making on the CNC router over there. You can see basically the wood, it'll get cut into widths on the straight line rip. It'll get sanded to thickness on an abrasive planer. It'll be glued together into panels or blocks. And so everything on this side of the first floor is setting up to go over there to be machined to whatever it needs to be machined to. Okay, let's go up to the second floor. Now on this floor we do traditional piano making. This is a fixture to assemble a skeleton, which is the core structural element in the piano. So you have stops and clamps and what have you, but at the end of the day you assemble a skeleton, and people from 100 years ago would understand this fixture perfectly.
Like you said before, it's basically a 19th century process.
It is. Fundamentally, grand pianos or pianos of any kind are a 19th century product, and many of the things in the factory today are entirely understandable by people who made them 100 years ago. This is a tension resonator. It is a feature that Mason and Hamlin brought into existence. It adds a steel truss rod system to this incredibly strong structure we already have. It pretty much guarantees that the rim holds its shape. And so you can see the posts, you can see the belly rail, you can see the rim. So let's look at the case making now. Here what we're doing is assembling the case. This is the outer rim. This is the skeleton or part of the skeleton here. The plate's already been set to this and then taken off. We just don't want to handle the weight of the cast iron plate through the rest of the process. They will mate back together after the finish is on it, and then it'll get strung. So let's just go up to the soundboard room. Soundboards are thin pieces of spruce. They're, in our case, about 11-30 seconds thick. Now here is a soundboard that has ribs attached. There's a bridge on the other side. The soundboard makes the sound pressure waves that you actually hear. This is equipment for gluing bridges on. All this is these are air cylinders on magnets that I can put absolutely anywhere. Every piano has a cast iron plate. Pianos have between 40 and 50,000 pounds of tension strung across that plate, so you need something with the strength of cast iron to be able to hold it. This is what the plate looks like after we've done all of the finishing work on it. It's all smooth, it's all been filled. When you're making a beautiful instrument, the expectation is it's beautiful in just about every possible way. Now over here, what we're doing is setting a plate. This is one of the most skilled jobs in the factory. When people say hand craftsmanship, this is the one that leaps to mind. You need to notch the bridge like that because where the bridge pins are needs to be a termination for the wire vibrating, and so those need to be exactly in the center of the holes for the bridge pins. If it isn't, you get funny sounds out of a piano. He makes it look easy, it's not. So you saw one close to, a plate ready for stringing. This is now what a strung grand piano looks like. So you see all the wires in place, the tuning pins are in place, the felt is in place, all of the things are done. These are strings, and I'm doing it in a way that I don't touch it with my skin because you'll make rust spots. These are the tuning pins. These are the hitch pins, right? This is what's called an aliquot. It tunes the back side of it in an interval in relation to the front side.
And the inside, the grain on the inside is so beautiful.
Yes, now this is what's called the Cambridge series, and this is what's called a Macassar ebony. It'll also be on the bottom of the lid, and it will be on the fall board. Sometimes you make this on the entire piano, but this is what's popular now for a case. Now we're going to put an action into the piano. An action is the assembly of keys and various parts, so when you press a key, the piano makes a sound. The first step of putting in a keyboard and action in is to fit the keyboard itself. The keyboard comes just like you see it on a panel, and so we have to fit the key frame to the key bed so that it's a one-to-one fit. Now once we do that, we'll position it and do all of those things, and then we'll move on and set a top action on top of it at all of the correct elevations and what have you. Once a keyboard is set into the piano, we now need to set an action on top of the keyboard. So here what we're doing is we're putting an action on. We've built up the cleats, and what's important is the height of the centers and the location front to back on the keyboard, which has all been done now. Here what we're doing is we're gluing hammers onto hammer shanks. The hammer is what actually strikes the string. The shank is what transmits the energy to the hammer. We're gluing the hammers onto the shanks and in the right position so everything lines up nicely with the strings. Regulating is adjusting the action so that it all functions correctly. You could view it as like timing in an automobile. So here, for instance, this is a let-off regulation, and what it means is that the hammer action quits driving the hammer 1/16 of an inch away from the string. And so this screw is turned to control that. So when the action goes back in the piano, it will function correctly, but out here we can reach everything to work on it. Once the action regulation is completed, now we need to voice the instrument. At this point it plays well, but it doesn't sound very good because the hardness of the hammer isn't quite right. If the hammer is too hard, it's a harsh, unpleasant sound. If it's too soft, it's not very powerful and not very well defined. And so the voicer, or the tone regulator, basically works with the hammers until a musical sound is achieved throughout the instrument. What you see here is he's needling a hammer.
What you're doing with the needle is you're stabbing the fibers, so you're manipulating the tone. You know, there's the pitch aspect of it where you're getting everything to proper pitch, and then you want to get the color right. You want to get a nice balance, nice rich bass, and then balance it out into the treble.
The entire 5th floor, both sides, is finished department. And so let's just walk through this floor here. You can see now they've just been sanding a lid. Here's rubbing a lid. This is going to be a satin. She's rubbing it with steel wool. So this is a walnut finish. Anything we put finish on, we put up here. You see what we would call leg tops. They're going to get finished and then they will be glued together with the bottom part of the leg later on. So here, for instance, you can see one that they've done some of the buffing. They sand it till it's flat and then they buff to get the polish. That's the satin finish. So let's go over and look at the spray rooms now. Kind of the point here is you build up finish until none of the wood grain shows. And so a 0 grain finish is kind of an expensive finish, but it's been the standard in the piano industry for 100 years, or actually more like 200 years. You can smell the finish. It's basically the smell of polyester, but these have all been sprayed. Once all of the case parts are on, we actually take it back apart and we buff, or we do what we call final polish, where now we make it look like a brand new piano. Inevitably, as you go through the process, the little scuffs and scrapes happen. So what we're doing here now is taking all of that out and we're buffing and polishing it so that it looks like a completely new instrument, which would be satisfactory to a new customer. Try out a concert grand. This is a 9'4".
Look at this. Oh my gosh.
Listen to this.
Wow.
That's what a concert grand does.
Right, I can see, because you don't get that from a regular upright.
No, you don't.
Now, who buys most of your pianos, or where do you sell most of your pianos?
Basically, we sell Mason & Hamlins to professional pianists. Like any good instrument, it has its own voice, it has its own tonality, and so a real musician won't just buy a brand name. They'll play pianos till they find one that speaks to them, and those are the people who buy Mason & Hamlins. And we can get them in a variety of finishes. The fancier finishes cost more than the simple black, but probably 90% of what we make is black, right? We make either a satin black like this or a polished black like that, but 90% of what we make is black. We've been entrusted with the responsibility of bringing back one of the world's finest instruments. As such, we feel a great obligation to the musical community and those who have loved Mason & Hamlins. Haverhill has been really quite good to Mason & Hamlin over the last 25 years, and we intend to be part of Haverhill for many years to come.